Research that resonates.
Schweizer has not been wrong on any of his years and years of reporting on the Bidens.
Investigations that matter.
If your last name wasn't Biden, do you think you would have been asked to be on the board of Burisma?
I don't know. Probably not. But that's, I don't think that there's a lot of things that would have happened in my life that if my last name wasn't Biden.
The only entities, the only people that would report on this, and Peter Schweizer, who deserves a Medal of Freedom, in my view.
This is The Drill Down with Peter Schweizer.
Hi, this is Peter Schweizer, and welcome to The Drill Down, where we relentlessly expose cronyism, corruption, and the abuse of power in Washington, D.C. The co-host of this program, of course, Eric Eggers. Eric, how are you?
Sorry, I was distracted by my phone for a second. But I was listening. I'm here, ready to go. I'm locked in.
Good. So, honest question for you.
Yep.
Name your addictions.
Oof. I mean, how much time do we have? And do we have to fundamentally change the category of this podcast?
Yeah, or should I talk to your wife about your addictions?
No, we don't talk about these things. It's very healthy. We are a country amidst a ton of addictions.
We are.
I have no shortage of vices. I'm happy to say that I think social media addiction isn't one of them.
Right.
But it is a growing problem for a number of people. And I know that you and your work with Blood Money have talked about TikTok as being a highly addictive social media platform. You talked about how the average American TikTok user spends 82 minutes a day just on that platform alone.
Yeah.
And that's more than twice any of the competitors. And it's because of the algorithm. It's because of the way that TikTok has this unique ability to shape and collect data on the user and then send them things tailored for them.
Right.
And it's so potent and it's so addictive for the user and beneficial to the company TikTok that it's actually a Chinese state secret.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not just limited, of course, to TikTok. We're going to talk today about TikTok, but we're going to talk about the industry in general.
Right.
Because if you think about it, these are kind of digital drugs, and they're designer digital drugs because these algorithms sort of study you, what you're interested in, what you're paying attention to, what you're not paying attention to. And then the algorithm adjusts your feed. Mm-hmm. So it's giving you exactly the thing that you are most prone to get addicted to.
That is the thing I'm addicted to. People being about me, basically. You nailed it.
So we're going to talk about that today. But of course, there are efforts to reform this. There are some bills that have been introduced. The problem is there's pushback, right? The big tech industry is beginning aggressive counter lobbying campaign. Mm. They're proposing some quote unquote reforms of their own, which are really obviously kind of laughable. And we're going to really explore the lay of the land. And then we're going to kind of handicap whether we think these efforts are going to get through or not.
Yeah, I love this topic because it's consistent with stuff that we've been talking about for a long time. We produced a documentary called The Creepy Line and explored the way that big tech was shaping, I think, the American experience without really us knowing about it. We focused maybe on a more political aspect in that film. But the reality is that big tech impacts every aspect of our life, including our culture. And the reason why it's mattering today is there are two laws in New York State. One is called the Stop Addictive Feeds Exploitation for Kids Act, aka the SAFE Act,
yep,
and the New York Child Data Protection Act. And they seem like reasonably common sense things to do. The SAFE Act would crack down on addictive recommendation algorithms by requiring them to provide default chronological feeds. So what that means is the algorithm you just explained being adaptive would be illegal.
Right.
You only can look in one type of feed based on the list and the order of it, right? And so the reason why they would do that is it would keep kids from becoming addicted to these algorithms.
Yeah.
Makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Unless you're a social media company.
Yeah, unless you're a social media company. And to be clear, I mean, this addiction is a massive problem.
Oh, yeah.
Statistics from California State University reports that 10% or 33 million Americans are addicted to social media compared to the average person. Young social media users age 18 to 22 account for 40% of all Americans who are addicted to social media. Kids in particular, it's pretty stunning. One study shows that the average teen, I mean, this is shocking. This is probably more than they sleep. Mm-hmm. The average teen is on a screen, largely their phone, for 7 hours and 22 minutes per day. kids 12 years old on average for 4 hours and 44 minutes a day. So this is a massive a consumer of time.
Yeah, but let me just tell you, I don't tell you how to parent your kids, okay? So can we just pause on the judgment? No, it is actually a quite significant problem. I have 4 children under the age of 10, and it's crazy because we don't give them a phone, but the begging has started. So I can't wait to use these statistics to tell them, listen, kids, this is not going to happen, because if you're locked into screens that much, of course, it's bad for you. They said they did a study, age 13 to 17 kids, teens that are addicted to social media, said 70% feel left out or excluded when using social media. 43% delete social media posts due to receiving too few likes. Bro, been there. Can I just say?
Yeah, I followed your Twitter X feed, and I can understand.
Can I just say, just to be very quick, just a quick aside, Scotty Scheffler gets arrested, okay, on the Friday for the Golf Run. I think I'm about to crush this thing because I'm like, finally, Scotty Scheffler unifying fans of the PGA and Black Lives Matter makes him even more Christ-like. It's everything. It's sports, it's politics, it's religion.
Yeah.
One dang like.
Yeah.
I didn't delete it though.
Yeah.
Because I'm a real one.
Yeah. You're going to let it out there and just deal with it and affect it. But yeah, it's a big
I
thing.
can handle the teens can't.
Exactly
though.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. You're used to rejection. Teenagers
true.
aren't. Teenagers aren't. And we all are as we mature. We get used to being rejected and people looking at you strangely. That would include the producer of this program, right? Sometimes look at us like, what are you doing? But yeah, the bottom line is that for young teenagers and young people, it's a huge problem because it creates these sorts of damaging effects. So let's talk about this issue that libertarians bring up.
Okay.
And I have libertarian instincts in a lot of ways. When you become a parent, you become less libertarian in a lot of respects. But, I do understand, like companies and businesses I don't like regulations in general. I think they're cumbersome. But we have a history in this country of actually setting up certain reforms when safety is at issue. Seatbelts are an example of this, and you did a little bit of research on the history of this.
Yeah, and I think, but we'll talk about the history, and I think it's instructive because we have sort of an issue, and I think it might have actually been Jordan Peterson, or it might have been somebody else that we spoke with when we were producing this film, The Creepy Line, that like introduced, at least to me, the idea of when we have a new form of technology, we use it as consumers for an extended period of time before we realize how to use that technology responsibly.
And how it's going to affect us. Nobody studied it. Nobody's looked at it. We just do it.
Like the Industrial Revolution started from like the late 1800s, so we've got machines and chemicals. We didn't invent the EPA till 1970.
Yeah.
And then you've got cars, right?
Yeah.
For the same deal. Cars began in the 1890s in the United States. The first country in the world to have a mass market for vehicles, the United States was. So go us. And then as a result, the more cars you see, you should start to see more deaths being involved.
Yeah.
So you had between 1920 and 1960, the rate of auto deaths doubled from 11 people per 100,000 to 22 per 100,000. So a significant increase in the number of deaths. So the first safety harness for a car was invented in 1885, but it wasn't until the mid-50s that cars even offered them as an option.
Yeah. In fact, my memory is when I was a young kid, my dad and mom, we had a Ford Valiant from the early 60s, had no seatbelts. And I remember sitting in the front seat with my dad, and he would say, all right, lean back, put your feet up on the dashboard as if somehow that's going to, cushion you. And you think about it, that's now kind of crazy. And it is kind of crazy. We got seatbelt laws after that. But here's the thing, at least in that case, your dad's driving, right? Somebody who cares about you, wants the best for you. When you think about these digital phones, it's kind of like putting your kids in a car without a seatbelt and then giving a total stranger the keys and say, go with it.
And imagine this. Imagine like we now can look, I think most people would say we look at what your father did and how irresponsible he was with you in the car and think that's crazy, right? Now it made sense at the time, but it's crazy today.
Yeah.
And I think in some time we'll come to look at giving our children access to apps with strangers, actually not strangers, corporate profiteers driving.
Right.
They're trying to collect as much data as possible. Remember, data is the new oil.
Yeah.
And so they're collecting as much information about our children and us as possible and then using it to target them for ads or more user time and all that stuff. And we will come back and be like, man, can you believe we did that with no safeguards or protections? And so those are among the safeguards or protections that New York State is the first, by the way, fun fact, New York State, also the first to mandate a seatbelt law.
There you go. New York State, at least they're heading something.
Nanny state. So here comes New York, and they're saying, hey, we think that the algorithm, which everyone knows is bad, should be based for kids unless there's parental consent, just on the chronological feed. Hey, what got posted earliest, what got posted latest, and then that's what they see. And Facebook and Twitter and all these companies are lobbying against it. And here's what the rationale for this, I think, is amazing.
Yeah.
Tech firms have hit back. This is from a New York Post article about the nearly $1 million tech companies have spent to lobby against these bills in the first quarter of 2024 so far. They cite fears that the legislation, again, just manipulating the algorithm feed, would stifle freedom of speech, online privacy for teens, limit internet access for migrants, and other underserved communities.
Wait, stop for a second. I don't understand the migrant thing. How is setting this up for kids, and it's got to be chronological, how is that going to affect migrants?
Maybe it's like if we don't collect data on the migrants, how do we know what they want to watch? I don't know. I mean, I think it seems laughable. They also say essentially disabling algorithms would prevent them from cracking down on hate speech.
Yeah, and of course, kids are not getting like any crazy porn or any snuff videos. They're not seeing any of that online already, right? With this great algorithm that's supposed to be stopping all this
Can I just say it's been at least a couple decades since I heard the word snuff video. So I'm not saying you're out of date.
What's the current term?
I don't know, but I don't think it's that.
Well, I don't trust creepy. I don't understand snuff video. Why that's out of time?
I think it's on a VHS cassette. Is what that is.
Well, anyway, whatever the term is, the point is creepy coders are basically creating these algorithms, feeding them to our kids. And I think that this reform is a great idea. And the notion that big tech is somehow standing up for the privacy of young people is absolutely laughable. So they're hiring lobbyists, right? They're going to run these media campaigns just like TikTok has done. I think one of the things that TikTok has done that has angered a lot of people is they have tried to manipulate and use TikTok influencers to turn them into quasi-lobbyists. Because what TikTok has basically said is, we're not going to sell.
Yeah.
This law says we have to sell. Instead of, we're not going to sell, we are going to let this thing crash and burn. And all you people that have built these businesses in TikTok, you better go and lobby, because we're going to, in other words, they're leveraging them and they're manipulating them. And I wonder if we're going to start seeing the same thing from these other tech companies, whether it's Meta. I did find it interesting, by the way, that Elon Musk claims that he actually supports these reforms. He's in favor of this legislation. Why do you think that is?
Because it's probably better for him if the algorithms for these other tech companies become enacted. And so, they can't be as addictive for them. And so it creates more customers for him. I mean, that's a guess. But I will say this, given, and we'll talk about just how big tech has become from a political lobbying force next, but given the time in which these things typically happen, I'm not going to bet on it happening anytime soon, just because to carry the car metaphor, cars get introduced in the late 1800s. You see this massive influx in auto deaths. The seatbelt becomes offered in cars in the 1950s. Ralph Nader writes this book, Unsafe at Any Speed, in the 60s. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration requires seatbelts to be in cars in 1968. So think about that. Like 60 years before they make seatbelts go in there. And it's another 15 before we then make them be used.
Oh, I remember that. The seatbelt laws, when the seatbelt laws came.
Were you pro seatbelt law?
I was anti-seatbelt law.
Me too, man.
I was a teenager, so when you become an adult, it's like, put on your seatbelt. It's the law, kids.
Yeah.
So you can use it to your benefit. But look, I think that it's going to be a fight, but I think it's a fight that we have to have, and I think it's a fight that we can win. And these big tech companies have to be reined in. I'm all in favor of the TikTok ban. I've been in favor of it. I think it's only a first step. It doesn't solve the problem. It's only the first step. And now we have to start whittling away at this control that they have over us. And I think, to the point you made earlier, to me, it's a little bit like the vaccine, the COVID vaccine. We were told by the medical establishment just take the vaccine. And now some people are starting to raise questions about, is it effective? Does it have side effects? Are the side effects more widespread than we imagine? But essentially, it was an experimentation because there was no widespread testing before it happened. It's the same thing with social media.
But don't you think by taking the vaccine, we helped ensure internet access for migrants? Like, hasn't that been proven? No, not quite. But yeah, I think, so you're right. We're told, and they kind of get away with all of it. We talked about this, they told us the election was done. They told us that anything that questioned it was they told us the vaccines were safe. And the point is that they also tell politicians what to do. And because of the amount of money they spend, they often get their way. There's a big money in politics report that I saw the Microsoft CEO said, he's like, I find that when I call people, they're willing to take my calls because of the amount of money that we spend. And so, you used to think about who the biggest corporate lobbyists are, and it's 100% big tech today. Right. Big tech eclipsed yesterday's big lobby spenders, oil and tobacco. In 1920, Amazon and Facebook spent twice as much as Exxon and Philip Morris as marketing. So, that's who we are now.
In 2020, yeah.
In 2020. It's only gotten worse, right?
Yeah, it's all about big tech. It's the oldest story in the book. It's follow the money. And in this case, the ability of big tech firms to hire lobbyists, and we know it's revolving door. You hire people that are relatives of elected officials, their former chief of staff. They can also hire family members. Yeah. We know, for example, that the Senate Majority Leader from the great state of New York, his daughter actually works for Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a myriad of ways in which, the tech industry can inform. Plus the fact that they have massive amounts of money. So they can, decide to open up a new facility in your congressional district or not, depending on what they want to do. So it's an enormous problem, and it's unchecked power. And the sort of arrogance that big tech has had for such a long time, I think is starting to be called into question because people are finally starting to fight back, and you're seeing it kind of on a bipartisan basis. I mean, New York is a blue state. I think these reforms are good. It's very similar to what Republicans like Josh Hawley and others are calling for. So that, I think, is a bright spot in what can often be a bleak picture when it comes to the threats that we're facing in the country today.
It's a great point you raised, because if New York is the first state to kind of lead this charge, we've documented the fact that tech companies like Facebook, like Google, whether it's because ideologically their employees are aligned with that particular political party, or strategically because they know that while Republicans tend to be more free market, Democrats are typically the ones that are more interventionist, right? They're the ones that say the government's got a role to play from a regulatory standpoint here. So they say strategically they align themselves with Democrats. They gave a lot of money there because they fended off what was most likely to be the encroachment from the government from the left. The Republicans are more laissez-faire. But then I think when Republicans saw, wait a minute, what are these guys doing? Yeah. And so if the Democrats are now coming after you, then that shows you that it is significantly a problem. I mean, internet addiction among teenagers is a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a massive problem. So what's your prediction? What is the landscape going to look like 3-4 years from now? Do you feel like there's going to be a serious reform agenda that's actually going to force these big tech firms to change, or are we just going to be kind of wallowed in this this trench warfare and nothing really happens?
So I think it's going to be about parental consent. But I would say this: I think actually Europe is ahead of us on this. We've looked at EdTech data. I think one of the great unreported stories, and we are continuing to look into this here at the Government Accountability Institute. But, in February of 2020, the New Mexico Attorney General actually sued Google because he said their G Suite educational software, their Chromebooks, they were potentially guilty of, infringing upon student data privacy.
Oh, I can't imagine that.
I know, right? And so they filed this lawsuit that said, hey, we think Google's being a bad actor with some student data. So then what happens in March of 2020? COVID happens, and Google's like, hey, here's a bunch of Chromebooks for everybody, guys. So their access to the student population didn't get smaller.
Right.
And now their lobbying efforts only gotten bigger, and their role and other big tech companies' role in education has only gotten bigger as well. So I think we have a massive student data engagement with technology, even though it might not be great for us as a society problem.
Yeah.
And I think that we're not going to anytime soon come fully faced with that, because of the amount of money that they get spent to keep those questions from being fully asked.
Yeah,
at least at the federal level. But that's something we're very much engaged in.
Yeah, and I think we should also be engaged just as individuals in looking at the issue of online screen addiction for ourselves and for other people. So I'll give you an example of a step that I took about 6 weeks ago.
Oh, so this you talking about your addictions now?
Yes, exactly. And
accountability
I will
software?
say I have been relentlessly mocked, especially by the younger demographic, about this. But so I found myself on my phone a lot, and I put it in the category of, well, I've got to keep up with work. I've got to see what's in the news because after all, that's partly the business that I'm in. What I realized is I was spending a lot of time on the phone. And I think it was addictive. So there is a feature you can do on your phone. There was a study that actually showed that a lot of the online apps that we get, they pick colors and features that are designed to addict you.
I just heard about this. Yeah.
So and there was an article in the New York Times about it. So I did what is called, I put a grayscale on my phone.
Yeah.
So my phone now is black and white. It's like black and white TV.
It's like the way you see the world.
Exactly. The way I live my life. No, it's important, I think, for us to look at a personal level because it's a lot of times addictions you convince yourself. It's not like I'm addicted and I don't care. It's like, well, no, I really need to be doing this. So I think we should do that with ourselves, also with our kids. I don't know, you guys have done a really good job of keeping screens away from your kids. They get access at a certain time, right? They can't just turn on the TV or turn on the computer anytime. They do a lot of reading, but it's a challenge. It takes an effort. You have to be intentional.
That's true. Summertime's here, so that may change a little bit. But I think it's screen time, and then what happens with the screen time? The screen time does something with the brain, and then what do the tech companies do with the information they're gathering? And that's what Europe's ahead of the game on this. And to finish the Google story, Denmark has recently come out and said, based on their privacy laws, Google may be unable to operate in their school system just because of their default settings in terms of what they do. So I do think the tide's changing a little bit in terms of this growing awareness of like, what are we giving these companies inadvertently and what are they doing with it without our consent? So I think the first step will be, parental consent.
Yeah.
And so I think parents need to have awareness that their consent's now going to be asked. And as you're aware, certain children, certainly some of mine, find ways around these safeguards. So no, I think it's a really big deal. It's worth watching what happens in New York. I would guess they come to some kind of a compromise about the parental consent. They still will get to do what they want to do, but there's an opt-in or opt-out function, right?
That's the thing to always remember. It ultimately has to come down to us because one of the themes that we always push is that big government and big business are not enemies. They're friends. So you can bet that these big tech companies are going to try to and probably effectively co-opt at least part of the process in these states and these reform efforts, and they're going to turn these reforms in a way that strengthen their market position vis-a-vis other competitors. So we are definitely going to stay on top of the story. Any final thoughts? Any other revelations about addictions you want to bring to the table while we're here on the air?
The grayscale on the air. You're full of them. Wisconsin, hello. No, I think that the role big tech plays in our lives, but I think the children are the key to combat this, right?
Yeah.
The children are the way that everyone sort of we're adults. We actively consent to letting them take our stuff if you have a Gmail account or a Facebook account or anything like that. But the kids are different, and I think the parents need to have an awareness of the role they can play in shepherding that because this online addiction amongst the youth is not getting better.
Yeah.
So
no, it's not. And it has huge amounts of psychological effects, shorter attention spans, depression, etc.
Dude, they changed the SAT. They got rid of any long reading passages because kids don't have the attention span to pay attention anymore. I call it the TikTokification of the SAT. No, society is changing because of how much time we spend on these social media algorithms.
And not for the better.
And not for the better.
Well, we appreciate it as always, you taking the time to spend it with us. Maybe our podcast is too long, right? I mean, we're going to have a lot of trouble getting TikTokers to pay attention to this, but we appreciate you always taking the time to listen to what we have to say on this. You can find out more about our research at thedrilldown.com, and you can find this podcast wherever fine podcasts are located. Again, thanks for listening. Until next time.